Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My name is Dr. Amber Arshad, and today my topic of presentation is application of regression models in healthcare settings. Learning objectives are in this presentation, I shall be explaining what is regression, what are the important models that are used in daily routine, what is linear regression, and how it is applied in healthcare setting, multiple binomial regression, polynomial regression, pitfalls of regression, how to prevent the common errors that we face during applying this application of these regression models, and recent updates in an MCQ session at the end. At the end of the presentation, the participants will be able to describe the practical application of regression analysis with reference to healthcare settings and public health. Regression analysis is a reliable method, and it starts with identifying which variable has an impact on the topic of interest. For example, the process of performing a regression allows you to confidently determine which factor matters the most and which factors can be ignored. So, how these factors influence each other will be discussed in the upcoming slides. What are the application areas of regression models? Whenever we are applying these regression models for the regression analysis, this estimate is used to identify the relationship between a dependent variable and one or more independent variables. And normally these techniques are used to predict the outputs of any kind of medication or new treatment that was introduced, forecasting the data, analyzing the time series, finding the causal effect dependencies between the variables. So why are models used in public health? The models that are used in public health, the models that are theories and models are used in program planning to understand, to explain the health behaviors, and to guide the identification, development, and implementation of interventions. What problems can be solved by regression? Basically, on a broader scale, as regression is used for the estimation of factors like sales, growth, markets, evaluation, customer demand. But in healthcare settings and in terms of public health, it can be used in several ways, explained later on in the presentation. What are the three main purposes of regression? One is to determine the strength of the predictors, forecast the effect, and trend forecasting. So, regression modeling is one of the important statistical techniques used in analytical epidemiology. And these regression model the effects of one or several explanatory variables like exposure, subject characteristic, risk factors on response of variables such as mortality, cancers can be investigated. This is the whole of the summary of the regression analysis models. The most commonly used linear regression, simple regression, polynomial regression, general linear regression models, and other are binomial regression that are commonly used with logistic regression and multinomial logistic regressions. Others are also forms of linear regressions. There are also other forms of multi-level models are also there, and non-linear regression models are also present that are non-parametric and semi-parametric regression analysis can be done. So regression analysis provides an equation for a graph so that you can make predictions about your data. It also provides a graphical representation of whole your data. For example, if you've been putting on weight over the last few years, it can predict how much you weigh in 10 years time if you continue to put on weight at the same rate. So this can be graphically represented with the help of this regression analysis. Regression analysis must be used to predict. One of the ways is to use this regression in healthcare sector is to predict the length of stay at the hospital. For example, regression has been used to predict the healthcare costs of the individuals being based on some variables. Prediction of total surgical procedure time to enable efficient use of operating theaters is one of the examples how these regression models can be applied in healthcare settings. So, what is regression analysis in clinical trials? A linear regression involves one, for example, if we are considering a linear regression, then it involves one independent variable and an outcome variable. And this should be used to model a relationship between data if the dependent variable is continuous and approximately normal. normally distributed. A multiple regression involves two or more independent variables that are expected to influence the outcome variable. For example, it can be used to predict the relationship between reckless driving and the total number of road accidents caused by a driver. Or to use a business example, we can say that effect on sales and spending a certain amount of money on advertising. So regression is one of the most common models of machine learning. When coming to the linear regression is the simplest form of regression and used to study the linear relationship between the dependent variable, for example, it's a blood pressure, and one or more independent variables like age, weight, sex, any of these. Like at one time, we will study the relationship between blood pressure or age, blood pressure or weight, and blood pressure or gender. So the practical uses of linear regression involves the following two categories. If the goal is prediction, forecasting, and error reduction, linear regression can be used to fit a predictive model to an observed data sets or values or response and explanatory variables. Linear regression is also used to predict the value of variable based on the value of another variable. And the variable you want to predict is called the dependent variable, while the predictor one you are predicting on the basis of these variable is an independent variable. And some simple linear regression shows this type of graph when we plot the different points that are joining the line on the data. For example, if a medical researcher often use linear regression to understand the relationship between the drug dosage and the patient blood pressure, or the researcher might administer various doses of certain drugs to patients and observes how their blood pressure responds. There is also a logistic regression model, logit model, and is the model of probability of an event that event taking place by having the log odds of an event by linear combinations of one or more independent variables. And usually the dependent variable is coded in zeros and ones, while the independent variables can each be a binary variable or a continuous. And the corresponding probability values labeled 1 can vary between 0, certainly the value 0, and 1, certainly the value 1. Hence, the labeling the function that converts log odds to probability is the logistic function. One of the important function of this logistic model is the sigmoid function. And we use this sigmoid function in order to map predicted values to probabilities. And the function that maps any real values to another value between 0 and 1. And in machine learning, we use this sigmoid to map predictions to probabilities. So what is logistic regression in public health? Logistic regression is used to estimate the association of one or more independent variable with a binary dependent variable. For example, this binomial regression is used to predict the dichotomous dependent variables based on one or more continuous nominal independent variables. Like in logistic regression in natural language processing, it's used to determine the sentiments of movie reviews, while in medicine, it can be used to determine the probability of patient developing a particular disease. So, logistic regression is widely used in many scientific fields. Another example of this logistic regression is supervised learning. It is a type of supervised learning and it is used to calculate or predict the probability of binary yes or no events occurring. An example of logistic regression could be applying machine learning to determine if the person is likely to be infected with COVID-19 or not. So, why predictive modeling is important in healthcare? Predictive modeling application in healthcare helps providers improve patient management and better adjust appointments to the doctor's schedules. Predictive models can also identify those patients who often skip their appointments. This is one of the examples. There is also polynomial regression, where it is a form of regression analysis in which the relationship between independent variable and a dependent variable is modeled as an nth degree in the X. Although polynomial regression fits a non-linear model, but as a statistical estimate problem it but as a statistical estimation problem it is linear in the sense that regression function is linear in unknown parameters that are estimated from the data. For this reason, polynomial regression is special case of multiple linear regression, as shown in the graph. So this is the polynomial regression as compared to the simple linear model. Here you can see that whenever we are performing a simple linear model and we are plotting a graph, it's like a straight uh, directly proportionate line. But in polynomial model, other factors are also there, and we are considering the multiple independent variables. So the curve is slightly changed its uh, shape whenever we are using a polynomial model. So what are the pitfalls of these regression models? Non-constant variance, autocorrelation, multicollinearity, which exist when two or more predictors in a regression model are moderately or highly correlated with one another. Overfitting, excluding important predictor variables, exploration, missing data, and power and sample size. So this is the concept of multicollinearity, in which high correlation of independent variables is present. They are overlapping, and dispersion of independent variables is less. Whereas and this is the dispersion of the dependent variable, and this is the dispersion for the green rings are the independent variable. Here you can see that it is overlapping. Most of the portion is overlapping, and when there is no collinearity, then the dispersion of independent variables is like this. So based on the complexity of the models, there can be two possible errors. There can be underfitting of the data and the overfitting. So for overfitting, like we can have high variance. You can see that we have joined every other dot on the on the graph, and it shows that the data has been overly fitted. Here it is underfitted and there is a high chance of bias. But when we have a good balance, then there is low bias and low variance among the data, and the representation is like this. So to overcome underfitting or high bias, we can basically add a new parameter to our model so that the model complexity increases and thus reducing the high bias. Sometimes a complexity model in which the case of linear regression can be considered as a number of predictors. It increases, then expected variance also increases and the bias decreases. An impartial OLS will place on the right side of the image, which is the part which is far from optimal, and the term is called overfitting, meaning that when we have to deal with underfitting and high bias, we add more predictors, number of predictors we add in the model so that we get a better results. Now, how can we overcome overfitting for a regression model? We can either use reduce the complexity and or either we can use regularization. So reduce the model complexity, we can use a stepwise regression selection of this, either forward backward, but that way would not be able to tell anything about the removed variables effect on the response. And second is regularization, which is done actually the all the other this slide would have been previous one. So one of the ways is to collect more data, keep the model simple, regularization that I would be explaining later on, cross validation, think, and be skeptical. So these are all the things that we can use for preventing the overfitting, and regularization is one of the ways that will be explained here. There are two types of regression regularization techniques. One is ridge regression, and that second is the lasso regression. So the lasso one is the least absolute shrinkage selector operator, and is a logarithm. Is another variation of linear regression like ridge regression, and we use lasso regression when we have a large number of predictor variables. And in lasso regression equation, the closed form of solution is missing for the coefficient, meaning that this form of expression of equation is missing in this type of equation. So this is one of the distinguished features of lasso regression from the ridge regression, that whenever we are calculating the coefficient, then this closed form of solution is missing. And in ridge regression is the variation of linear regression, and we use ridge regression to tackle multicollinearity problems. And due to multicollinearity, we see very large variance in a least square estimate of the model. So to reduce this variance of degree of bias, we use this regression estimate. Like you can see in this, there is a size and weight. And whenever we used the normal linear regression, the line was like this. But when we use the lasso regression, it slightly changed its direction. And with using lasso regression, it was a different line on the data set. So they both do similar things, but in this case, they make our predictions of size less sensitive to this tiny training data sets. So this is the main idea behind the ridge regression, to find a new line that doesn't fit the training data as well. So in other words, we introduce a small amount of bias into how new lines is fit to the data. And in other words, by starting a slightly worse fit, ridge regression can provide better long-term predictions. And this is the whole scenario of whenever we are using visual depiction of the data sets. So whenever we are having a low bias and low variance of a model, so the whole of the data points will be concentrated in this mid circle. Normally in linear regression models, there is low variance and high chances of high bias. So the data set is fitting in the model like this in the outer circle. So this is the depiction for the linear regression. And this is for the polynomial regression. And so the models having the high variance with high bias will look like these ones, and with low variance and high bias will look like this one. So this is only for the purpose of understanding the concept how bias and variance can affect the model complexity and the overall prediction of the results. So now it's time for the recent updates. So this was a paper that was published and showing the alternative to logistic regression model in experimental studies. And in experiment is psychological or education, we use logistic regression models. And in logistic regression models, we use alternative models that have better results. One of them is the linear probability model, the log binomial model, or the modified Poisson regression model. And when they applied these models, they got better results. Unbiased and more valid models were developed. So an applied example is provided as well over here. So this is one of the examples where a non-linear regression model is used to just to detect the incubation period for the COVID-19 disease. And in this paper, a semi-parametric, that is a non-linear model for regression, was used. And the approach was to account for the pandemic growth and selection bias in the data collection. And this demonstrates that the feasibility and advantages of the proposed methods through extensive simulation studies and provide the application to data sets on outbreaks. And last is the simple linear correlation and regression analysis using Microsoft Excel and its application in marketing management. The point here is to that we only consider that we can use the SPSS for regression analysis and how to use it, the data inputs and all that. We widely use this Microsoft Excel, and we use for the data storage. So application of Microsoft Excels are used to perform statistical calculations. And the results showed that the calculations of correlation and simple integration can be done with this Microsoft Excel application easily, quickly, and efficiently. And applied in marketing can be easy, and it can also be applied in the healthcare settings as well. So now it's time for the MCQs. A group of students XYZ were given a task to evaluate the effect of a drug on blood pressure values using linear regression model. So in regression analysis, the variable that is being predicted is which type of variable? The one we are having here is the blood pressure. Either it's an independent variable that we are predicting, the dependent variable that are predicting, usually denoted by X, usually denoted by R, or usually it is denoted by lambda. Which of the following option most appropriately fits for the variable that is being predicted in the scenario? Either it's
A.
A, B. B is the right answer, the dependent variable. Logistic regression transforms the output probability to be in a range of 0 and 1. Which of the following function is used in logistic regression to convert probability in a range between 0 and 1. Either it's sigmoid, mode, square, mean, or standard deviation.
Standard deviation.
Beta.
Yes, it's alpha, it's sigmoid function of the logistic regression model that we use to transform our outputs to probabilities. Regression techniques are the most widely used statistical techniques employed on large variety of optimization problems in the field of applied research. Which of the following method does not have a closed form solution for its coefficients? Either it's a ridge rejection, it's lasso, linear, binomial, or logistic. Whenever we are adjusting
Binomial.
whenever we are adjusting the complexity or we are regularizing the models and we are using the solution equations for the coefficients and there have not been a closed form for lasso. So this is beta. To test the linear relationship of y and an x independent continuous variable using regression analysis, which of the following plots is best suited? Scatter plot, the bar chart, histogram, forest plot, or a pie chart?
A.
Yes, A is the
Alpha.
right
A
answer.
is
It's
scatter
always a
plot.
scatter plot. And then we give a line diagram by joining the points on the graph. Which of the following diagram best represents the linear regression in terms of bias and variance? Either it's A, the low bias and the low variance. Either it's B, low variance or high bias, this one. Either it's C, the high variance or the low bias, this one. Or D is the high variance or the high bias, this one. Or both variance and
Charlie.
bias are unremarkable.
A.
Beta.
Yes, beta is the right
Charlie.
answer because in
Beta.
linear regression, yes, beta is the right answer because in linear regression we have a higher chance of bias and with low variance, so beta is the right answer. In simple linear regression model, one dependent variable, if we change the input by one unit, how much output variable will change and how we will see it? Like in this, if we change it by 1 unit, how it will be depicted? Either it will be changed by 1, there would be no change in the whole pattern. Either we can see it by the change in the slope, by the change in its means, or by twice the previous value. How can we see the change if we change the input variable by the unit 1?
A.
I
Alpha.
think it would be by the overall direction of the slope. So C is the right answer. By 1 doesn't makes any sense, so we cannot choose this option. What by 1? In not unit is given, no description is given, so the most probable option that we can choose here is by its slope. A teacher at an institute XYZ finds some of the students speak not very attentive in the class during his lectures on regression analysis. To gain attention, he asks one of the students sitting at the back of its back that if a constant of 2 is subtracted from each of the value of x and y, the regression coefficient is reduced by 2, no change, increased by 2, half of the regression coefficient, increased by 3. We have subtracted a constant of 2 from each value of x and y. What will be the effect on regression
B.
coefficient? Yes, B is the
Beta.
right answer because since we are subtracting the constant from the both of the values, so it will not be changed. Right answer. So in regression model, the following a regression model in which more than one dependent variable is used to predict a dependent variable is called, like in this.
Beta, multiple regression.
That's multiple regression
Beta.
model. Yes, right answer. A term used to describe the case when the independent variable in a multiple regression model is correlated is, like in this one. We can say it's
Collinearity.
yes, it's
C.
multicollinearity. Yes, that's right answer. And last one is quite easy. When measurement errors are present in explanatory variables, then the parameter estimate becomes what? Biased, unbiased, indeterminate, infinite, unchanged.
A.
By
They
A.
become biased.
Alpha.
Yes, the right answer is A. This is the key. Thank you, and this is the YouTube link. You can see the videos at this link. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amber. Very nice presentation as always, and a very thoughtful discussion on MCQs. Thank you very much, and very nice time management. Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz, ma'am.